Some stories find you at just the right time. This one came to me on a quiet afternoon, and I knew it needed telling. It's about a widow named Evelyn Brooks, 47 years old, standing alone on a train platform while younger women were chosen one by one. Most folks would call that the end of something. But I've lived long enough to know that sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning, wearing different clothes. This is a story about dignity, about useful work, and about two people who stopped expecting anything from life until life surprised them both. The last man walked past without stopping. Evelyn Brooks heard his boots scrape against the wooden platform, felt the brief pause as his eyes swept over her. Then nothing, just the sound of him moving toward the 26-year-old in blue calico. 6 women had arrived on the 8:15 from Denver. By 11 o'clock, 5 had been chosen, paired off like livestock at auction, though everyone called it the matrimonial arrangement because that sounded civilized. Evelyn stood where she'd stood for three hours. Navy wool dress, practical. No bright colors. No ribbons in her graying hair. Her carpet bag sat at her feet, brass clasp catching the autumn light. The station master shuffled over, tobacco bulging in his cheek. "Coffee's hot, if you want." She shook her head. "I'll catch the 2:15 back to Denver." He nodded, said nothing, returned to his post. 47 years old. Third time at Copper Creek. Third time watching younger women walk away on someone's arm. She didn't sit. Sitting meant giving up. So she stood watching the empty tracks stretch toward the horizon and waited for a train that would take her back to nothing. If this story speaks to you, I'd love to hear where you're joining us from today. They say shared stories make the miles feel shorter. Drop a comment and let us know your corner of the world. Hoofbeats. Evelyn turned toward the sound. A bay gelding came around the depot at a hard canter, sides dark with sweat, foam flecking its bit. The rider pulled up short, dust rising in a cloud that caught the afternoon light. He dismounted before the horse fully stopped. His knees buckled for a half second. She saw it. The way a body betrays exhaustion. Then he straightened and tied the reins to the hitching post with hands that moved too fast. 52. Maybe older. Lean in the way men got when they worked more than they ate. Sun-weathered skin, deep lines around eyes that had spent decades squinting at horizons. Dust coated his clothes, his hat, the stubble on his jaw. He walked past her without a glance. Straight to the telegraph window. "Pete." His voice carried. Rough. Urgent. "Where's Dawson?" "The assessor." Old Pete shifted his tobacco to the other cheek. "Prescott? Back next Thursday?" The man's hand flattened against the window frame. He stayed like that, palm pressed to wood, head bowed for 5 full seconds. Evelyn counted them. "Bank's calling my loan." He said it to no one, to the air. 60 days, and the one man who might help is in Prescott. Pete spat into the dirt, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Matchmaking's done," Pete said, jerking his chin toward Evelyn. "But there's one lady left. Good woman, from what I can tell. Widow?" The man turned. Evelyn met his eyes. She didn't look away, didn't smile, didn't smooth her hair or adjust her posture. She'd spent 3 hours performing for men who weren't interested. She was done performing. He studied her the way a man studies a horse he's considering buying, not unkindly, but thoroughly, taking measure. She studied him back. The worn collar of his shirt. The calluses visible even from 10 feet away. The way he held his hat in both hands, turning it slowly by the brim. He walked toward her, stopped at a respectful distance. "Ma'am?" He nodded once. I'm Caleb Rivers. I own a ranch north of here. A pause. Something shifted in his face. Or I did, until the bank decided to change the rules. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her carpetbag handle. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself, 3 years ago. Standing in a lawyer's office in Kansas City while men in suits explained how everything Thomas built now belonged to someone else. Evelyn Brooks, she said. I managed a freight company until my husband's partners decided to change the rules. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, with recognition. Sounds like we've met the same kind of people, Caleb Rivers said. Well, his voice was flat, not angry, just tired in a way that went deeper than one bad day. Evelyn nodded toward the wooden bench along the platform wall. Sit down, Mr. Rivers. You look like you've been writing since before dawn. He hesitated, glanced at the telegraph window where old Pete was pretending not to watch, glanced at the two women lingering near the general store across the street, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. People are watching, he said. People are always watching. Sit down anyway. He sat. She sat beside him, leaving a proper distance between them. The bench was worn smooth by years of waiting. She could feel the grain of the wood through her skirt, polished by countless passengers who'd sat here watching trains come and go. Caleb Rivers removed his hat, turned it slowly in his hands. The sweatband inside was dark, salt-stained. My father built the ranch in '61, he said. Came out from Missouri with $40 and a mule. By the time I was old enough to help, we had 300 head and a house with a real floor. He paused. Good years and bad years after that. Drought in '85 nearly finished us. I took a loan from First Regional Bank. $800. Reasonable terms. Or so I thought. Evelyn opened her carpetbag. Her fingers found the leather notebook by touch edges soft from 15 years of use, pencil still tucked in its loop. She opened it to a blank page. Caleb watched her. What are you doing? Listening. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. He went on. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like water finding a crack in a dam. 8 months ago, the bank manager, a man named Whitmore, had called him into the office. There was a clause in the original contract. Whitmore explained. A provision for accelerated repayment. Under certain conditions. Conditions that had apparently been met. What conditions? Evelyn asked. He said something about property value assessments, territory regulations. I didn't understand half of it. Caleb's jaw tightened. What I understood was the number, $1,200, due in 60 days. Or the bank takes everything. Evelyn's pencil moved across the page, quick strokes, notes only she could read. The original loan was $800, she said. You're telling me it's now $1,500 total with interest? That's what Whitmore says. In less than 3 years, that's what he says. She stopped writing, looked up at him. Who wrote the contract? Mr. Rivers. His brow furrowed. What do you mean, the loan agreement? Who drafted it? Your lawyer? An independent solicitor. I don't have a lawyer. The bank's man handled everything. Whitmore himself. I think. He rubbed the back of his neck. Lawyers in Prescott want $200 just to look at you. I don't have $200. Evelyn wrote something in her notebook, underlined it twice. You signed a contract written by the same man who's now calling your loan. Caleb's face changed, the realization moving across his features like a cloud crossing the sun. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't. That's what men like Whitmore count on. The afternoon sun had shifted, Shadows stretched longer across the platform. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and fell silent. "Mrs. Brooks." Caleb turned to face her fully. "You said you managed a freight company. What does that mean exactly?" "It means I handled contracts for 15 years. Suppliers, shipping agreements, payment schedules, legal disputes." She closed her notebook but kept it in her lap. "My husband Thomas built the company. I kept it running. Every piece of paper that came through our office passed through my hands. And when he died, his partners found ways to change the rules, just like your Mr. Whitmore." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The two women across the street had stopped pretending to shop. They stood openly now, watching. "What happened to the company?" he asked. "Gone. They took it." Evelyn's voice stayed level. "I fought for 6 months. Hired a lawyer with money I didn't have. Lost anyway. Then why?" He stopped, saying, "Started again." "Why would you help me? You lost your own fight." "Because I've seen tricks like this before. And because I need somewhere to go that isn't a boarding house in Denver." She turned to face him directly. This close. She could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. The way his hands gripped his hat too tightly. The slight tremor in his shoulders that came from riding too hard on too little sleep. "I'm not looking for love, Mr. Rivers. I'm 47 years old. I've buried one husband already. What I'm looking for is useful work and an honest arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "Let me look at your contracts. All of them. The original loan, any amendments, every piece of correspondence from the bank. If there's a weakness in their case, I'll find it. And if there isn't, then you'll be no worse off than you are now. But you'll know for certain." Caleb stared at her. The hat had stopped turning in his hands. "What do you want in return?" "A place to stay, honest work, room and board until we see this through, one way or another." She paused. "And if we win, if we save your ranch, we can discuss longer terms then." The dog barked again. A door slammed somewhere. The smell of coal smoke drifted from the depot, mixing with the dry sage scent of the autumn air. Caleb Rivers stood up. For a moment, Evelyn thought he would walk away, thank her politely, and ride back to his failing ranch alone, too proud to accept help from a woman he'd known for 20 minutes. Instead, he extended his hand. "Mrs. Brooks." His voice was rough but steady. "I'd be obliged." She rose, took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, the hand of a man who built things. Hers was just as firm. "We have an agreement. Then, we do..." Old Pete's voice carried from the telegraph window, low but audible. "Well, I'll be darned." The two women across the street turned away, disappointed or scandalized or both. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. What mattered was the document box waiting at a ranch 3 hours north. The contracts Evelyn hadn't seen yet. The clauses that might or might not contain the weakness she was looking for. She picked up her carpetbag. "The 2:15 to Denver," she said. "I won't be needing it after all." Caleb settled his hat back on his head. "Wagons at the livery. 3-hour ride to the ranch." 3 hours? Evelyn did the math in her head. They'd arrive after dark. She'd be spending her first night under the roof of a man she'd just met, in a place she'd never seen, chasing a problem that might have no solution. But when Caleb Rivers turned toward the livery stable, she followed, and she didn't look back at the empty platform where she'd stood alone all morning, waiting for something that never came. The wagon seat was harder than it looked. Evelyn shifted her weight, trying to find a position that didn't send jolts up her spine with every rut in the road. The horsehair cushion had worn thin years ago, and she could feel the wooden slats beneath. Caleb Rivers held the reins loosely, letting the two draft horses find their own pace. His bay gelding was tied to the back of the wagon, head bobbing with each step, still recovering from the hard ride that morning. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The road wound north through scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows that stretched across the packed dirt. Evelyn watched the landscape change the flat terrain near town, gradually giving way to rolling hills, then steeper rises that made the horses lean into their harnesses. "That's Widow's Peak." Caleb pointed toward a mountain to the west, its summit sharp against the sky. "Father named it after Ma died, after Saru. Said the mountain looked lonely, standing apart from the others like that." Evelyn studied the peak. It did stand alone, separated from the range behind it by a wide valley. When did she pass? 63. I was 19. He adjusted his grip on the reins. Father lasted another 8 years, worked himself into the ground, quite literally. Found him in the north pasture one morning. Heart gave out. The wagon wheels creaked. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. "Thomas died of pneumonia," Evelyn said. The words came out before she decided to speak them. 3 years ago. He was in Abilene, finishing a freight run. I was in Kansas City, keeping the books balanced. By the time the telegram reached me, he'd been gone 2 days. Caleb said nothing, but his silence had a different quality now, not uncomfortable, just present. The business partners moved fast. She continued. 6 months after the funeral, they'd found enough irregularities in Thomas's bookkeeping to justify buying me out. Irregularities they'd created themselves, I reckon, but I couldn't prove it. Any family? A daughter, Sarah. She's in San Francisco with her husband. Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. She writes when she remembers, which isn't often. The road curved around a stand of cottonwoods. Leaves turned gold in the autumn light, through the branches. Evelyn caught a glimpse of water a creek, running clear over smooth stones. How much further? Another hour, maybe less. The shadows lengthened. The temperature dropped as the sun sank toward the western ridge. Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the wool scratch against her neck. Caleb pointed again, this time toward a gap between 2 hills. Through there. The ranch sits in a valley on the other side. My grandfather found it in 55, but he didn't have the money to buy it proper. Father came back in 61 with enough cash to file the claim. The wagon climbed. The horse's breath came harder, steam rising from their nostrils in the cooling air. Evelyn braced herself against the seat as the grade steepened. Then they crested the ridge. Below, a valley opened like a secret. Cottonwoods lined a creek that wound through the center, their golden leaves catching the last of the daylight. A 2-story house sat on a gentle rise. White paint faded, but walls solid. A red barn stood nearby. Doors closed against the evening chill. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray column. 300 acres. Caleb had said. Maybe more. Evelyn's hands pressed flat against her thighs. Her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. She hadn't wanted something this much in years. Hadn't let herself want anything this much. Wanting led to losing. And she'd lost enough. But looking at this valley, this land that someone had built a life on, that someone was about to lose, she felt the old hunger stir. "It's beautiful," she said. Caleb didn't answer. He just clicked his tongue at the horses and started down the slope toward home. A man waited on the porch. He was older than Caleb's 60, maybe 65, with close-cropped gray hair and skin the color of oiled walnut. He stood with his arms crossed, watching the wagon approach with an expression that gave nothing away. "Took your time," he called as Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. "Biscuits are cold." "Josiah, this is Mrs. Evelyn Brooks. She'll be staying with us for a while." Josiah's eyes moved to Evelyn, measured her the way she'd measured Caleb back at the station thoroughly, without apology. "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat. "I don't know what he told you, but the roof leaks and he snores." Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from 3 hours of sitting. "I've survived worse. You know anything about mending fences? Mrs. Brooks, the wooden kind or the legal kind?" Something shifted in Josiah's face, not quite a smile, but close. "I reckon I like her already," he said to Caleb. "Supper's on the stove. I'll see to the horses." The kitchen was clean but bare. No curtains on the windows, no cloth on the table, no flowers, no photographs, no signs that anyone had tried to make this house into something more than shelter. Evelyn noticed it all: the cast-iron stove with its banked coals, the tin plates stacked on open shelves, the single coal oil lamp burning on the table, a house where men lived alone. Supper was beans, salt pork, and biscuits that had indeed gone cold. They ate in silence, forks scraping against tin. The food was plain but filling, and Evelyn realized she hadn't eaten since the night before. "Josiah's been with me since '72, Caleb said, pushing his empty plate aside. "Came up from Texas after the war. Best hand I've ever had." Josiah grunted from his seat at the end of the table. "Only hand you've got left. The others quit when the money ran out." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Evelyn caught Josiah's eye. Something passed between them: a question, an answer. She glanced toward Caleb, then back. Josiah shook his head slightly. "Don't ask. Not yet." After supper, Josiah disappeared into the darkness toward the bunkhouse. Caleb brought out a wooden box with brass hinges, scarred and dented from years of handling. "Everything's in here," he said, setting it on the table. "Deed, loan papers, letters from the bank, all of it." Evelyn pulled the lamp closer, opened the box. Papers, dozens of them, some yellowed with age, others crisp and new. She lifted the first stack, the original deed, dated 1861, her fingers tracing the faded signatures at the bottom. "This will take time," she said. "Several nights. At least, these documents need to be read carefully. Take whatever time you need." She began with the loan agreement, $800, dated March 1885. She read it slowly, line by line, her pencil moving across her notebook as she took notes. The First Amendment, dated September 1885, minor adjustments to the payment schedule. The Second Amendment, dated February 1887. Evelyn stopped. Her eyes moved back to the top of the page. Read the date again. Read the terms beneath it. The interest calculation had changed. Simple interest had become compound. The payment schedule had been restructured, and there, at the bottom of the page, a new clause, provision 14, subsection C, authorizing accelerated repayment, under conditions so vaguely defined they could mean anything. Caleb's signature sat at the bottom of the page, except it wasn't quite right. Evelyn held the paper closer to the lamp, studied the loops and strokes of the handwriting, compared it to the signature on the original loan agreement. The R was wrong. Caleb Rivers made his R's with a sharp upward stroke at the start. This R curved the opposite direction. She looked up. Caleb sat across the table, watching her face. "You found something," he said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn set the paper down. Her hands were trembling slightly from exhaustion, or from what she'd discovered. She couldn't tell. "Mr. Rivers," she said slowly, "did you sign this Second Amendment?" "I signed everything Whitmore put in front of me. I told you that." "Look at the signature." He leaned forward, squinted at the page in the lamplight. His face went pale. "That's not my handwriting," he said. "That's not how I write my name." Evelyn nodded. Someone had forged Caleb's name on a document that would cost him everything. And tomorrow, she was going to find out who. Evelyn spread the documents across the kitchen table. Morning light slanted through the window, catching the dust motes that swirled above the papers. She'd worked through 3 nights now, sleeping in fragments, waking before dawn to continue. Her eyes felt like they'd been rubbed with sand, and her neck ached from hunching over the lamp. 11 pages of notes sat beside her elbow. 11 pages of numbers, dates, and questions that needed answers. Caleb stood across the table, coffee cup in hand, watching her arrange the evidence. "Here." Evelyn's finger came down on the Second Amendment. "Look at the ink." He leaned closer. She could smell the soap he'd used that morning, the coffee on his breath. "What am I looking at? The original agreement was written with older ink. See the color brownish black, slightly faded? That's what you'd expect from a document written in 1885. She slid the amendment beside it. "This one is bluer, fresher. The ink is newer than the date on the paper." Caleb's brow furrowed. "Could just be a different bottle." "It could, but look at the signature." Evelyn pulled both documents closer together. "Your name on the original, the R in Rivers, starts with an upward stroke. Sharp, decisive. Now look at the amendment." She watched his face as he studied the signatures, watched the realization move across his features. "The R curves the wrong way," he said. "You didn't sign this document, Mr. Rivers?" He straightened, set his coffee cup down with a thunk that sloshed liquid over the rim. "I'd remember signing something that changed the terms this much. I'd remember that." "I believe you. But believing isn't enough. We need proof that will hold up in front of a judge." Josiah appeared in the doorway. Hat in hand, he looked at the papers spread across the table, then at Evelyn's red-rimmed eyes. "You been up all night again?" "Most of it," he grunted. "I'll make more coffee." "You're gonna need it." 4 days later, Evelyn climbed down from the wagon in front of the Copper Creek County Recorder's office. The building was small, single-story, whitewashed walls, a wooden sign that needed repainting. She smoothed her dress, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and pushed through the door. The clerk behind the counter was young, 23, maybe 24. Thin shoulders, ink-stained fingers, wire-rimmed spectacles that sat crooked on his nose. A nameplate on the counter read, "Edwin Marsh." "Good morning." Evelyn set her carpetbag on the floor. "I'd like to request copies of all property liens filed against the Rivers Ranch, north of town, Section 42. Edwin's pen stopped moving. He looked up at her, then quickly away. That's a lot of documents, ma'am. It might take some time." "I have time." "There's a fee, 15 cents per page." Evelyn reached into her pocket, feeling the coins Caleb had pressed into her hand that morning. "I have money." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "I'll need to check with that as... I should probably ask..." Mr. Marsh. Evelyn kept her voice gentle. I'm not asking for anything unusual. These are public records. Any citizen has the right to view them. He stared at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe fear? Then he turned and disappeared into the back room. Evelyn waited. The clock on the wall ticked. Dust swam in the light from the single window. 10 minutes passed. 15. Edwin returned with a stack of papers clutched against his chest. His hands were trembling. Here. He set them on the counter. Everything filed in the past 3 years. That'll be $2.40. Evelyn counted out the coins. Thank you. Mr. Marsh. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. Ma'am? She turned. Edwin stood behind the counter, fingers pressed flat against the wood, shoulders hunched like he was bracing for a blow. Be careful, he said. With what you're looking for, just be careful. Across town, Caleb pushed through the doors of First Regional Bank. The interior was cool, dim, smelling of furniture polish and old money. A brass chandelier hung from the ceiling. Leather chairs lined the waiting area. Behind a mahogany partition, 2 clerks bent over ledgers, pens scratching. Horace Whitmore sat at the large desk in the back. He looked up as Caleb approached, a thin smile spreading across his face. Mr. Rivers? What a pleasant surprise. Whitmore gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please, sit. Caleb remained standing. I want to see the original loan documents, all of them. I'm afraid that's not possible. Bank records are confidential. They're my records, my signature, my land. Whitmore's smile didn't waver. The documents are in order, Mr. Rivers. Your signature is on every page. Perhaps if you'd read more carefully before signing, we wouldn't find ourselves in this unfortunate situation. Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides. He forced them to relax. I never signed that Second Amendment. The document says otherwise. The document is wrong. Whitmore stood. He was shorter than Caleb, softer, but something in his posture suggested he wasn't worried. Men like Whitmore never worried. They had lawyers and paperwork, and the weight of institutions behind them. Mr. Rivers, I understand this is difficult. Losing a family property is never easy. But the law is clear. You have 47 days to produce $1,200. If you cannot, the bank will exercise its legal right to foreclose. He spread his hands. I wish there was something I could do. Caleb stared at him for a long moment. Whitmore's smile never flickered. We'll see, Caleb said. So we'll see what the law says. He turned and walked out, boots echoing on the polished floor. That evening, they met at the general store. Evelyn sat on a barrel near the pickle crock. The stack of documents from the recorder's office spread across her lap. The smell of brine and coffee beans filled the air. Somewhere in the back, the owner cranked the coffee grinder. The mechanical whir, a steady rhythm beneath their conversation. Whitmore wouldn't show me anything, Caleb said, and sat there smiling like a cat with cream. I didn't expect him to. Evelyn held up one of the documents. But I found something better. She'd spent 4 days cross-referencing the liens, comparing dates, signatures, clause language. The pattern had emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in solution. There are 3 other ranchers with identical provisions, she said. Hendricks, Marshall, Patterson. All of them took loans from First Regional in 84 or 85. All of them had amendments filed in a 6-week window earlier this year, February through mid-March. Caleb frowned. Same balloon payment clause, word for word, same interest recalculation, same vague conditions for accelerated repayment. She met his eyes. Mr. Whitmore isn't just cheating you. He's running a scheme. And we're not the only ones caught in it. The coffee grinder stopped. In the sudden silence, Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat. If we can get the other ranchers to stand with us, she said, we'd have 3 more examples of the same fraud 3 more signatures that might not match, 3 more families willing to testify. You think they'd do it? I think they're scared and angry and watching their land slip away, just like you. She began gathering the documents, sliding them back into her bag. I'm going to write to all 3 of them tonight, explain what I've found. Ask them to meet. Caleb watched her hands move quick, precise, certain. Mrs. Brooks. She looked up. When we were at the station, you said you lost your fight, the freight company. Your husband's partners took everything. They did? Then why do you think this will be different? Evelyn paused, documents half gathered. The question hung in the air between them. Because I was alone then, she said finally. Because I didn't know what I was looking for until it was too late. Because I trusted lawyers who were paid by the same men who were stealing from me. She tucked the last paper into her bag. This time, I know exactly what I'm looking for. And I found it. She stood, lifting the carpet bag onto her shoulder. Mr. Whitmore isn't stupid. Mr. Rivers, he's counting on you being too proud to ask for help and too tired to fight. Then he doesn't know me. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. He doesn't know us. They walked out of the general store together, into the fading light of an October evening. 5 days later, the letters went out 3 identical envelopes, addressed to Hendricks, Marshall, and Patterson, explaining what Evelyn had found and asking them to meet at the Rivers Ranch on the 1st of November. Evelyn stood at the post office window, watching the clerk stamp each envelope. 3 chances. 3 families who might be willing to stand up. The clerk handed her a receipt. She folded it into her notebook. Next to 11 pages of evidence and a list of questions that still needed answers, 1 question sat at the top, underlined twice. Why had Edwin Marsh's hands been shaking? Sunday morning came quiet. Evelyn woke to silence. No scratch of Josiah's boots on the porch. No clatter of pans in the kitchen. No low murmur of men's voices discussing the day's work. Just the creak of the house settling and the distant call of a meadowlark. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the spare room. 18 days she'd been here. 18 days of contracts and correspondence and numbers that didn't add up. Her eyes ached. Her shoulders ached. Her mind ached from turning the same problems over and over, looking for angles she might have missed. The letters had gone out 5 days ago, no responses yet. She dressed slowly, pulling on her navy wool dress, pinning her hair in its usual knot at the base of her neck. Her fingers brushed the mourning brooch at her collar jet black. Gold setting. The only piece of jewelry she'd kept when the partners took everything else. 3 years she'd worn it. 3 years of black and gray and practical shoes. Downstairs, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at nothing. Josiah went to church, he said without turning. Won't be back until afternoon. Evelyn poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove. It had gone lukewarm. She drank it anyway. You don't go used to. Haven't been since Ruth left. He turned the cup in his hands. Didn't seem right. Sitting in that pew alone, people looking at you, feeling sorry. Evelyn understood. She'd stopped going too, after Thomas died. The sympathy was worse than the grief, all those kind faces, those soft voices, those hands pressing hers as if pity could fill the empty space beside her. "I was thinking," Caleb said. "You've been here nearly 3 weeks. All you've seen is the inside of this kitchen and the road to town." He stood, carried his cup to the basin. "You should see the place proper, not just the paperwork." The mare's name was Penny. She was a buckskin, 14 hands, gentle-mouthed and patient. Caleb had saddled her while Evelyn finished her coffee, and now she stood in the yard, reins looped over the fence rail, waiting. "Can you ride?" Caleb asked. Evelyn gathered her skirts and swung up into the saddle. The leather creaked beneath her weight. Her body remembered the motion, the adjustment of balance, the settling of weight into the stirrups, the subtle communication between rider and horse. "Thomas and I moved freight across Kansas for 10 years, she said. "I've sat a horse." Caleb's eyebrows rose. But he said nothing, just mounted his bay and turned toward the hills. They rode north, following the creek as it wound through the valley. The water ran clear over smooth stones, catching the morning light. Cottonwood leaves drifted down around them, gold and brown, settling on the surface of the water like scattered coins. The land was beautiful. Evelyn had known that from the first moment she'd seen it, cresting the ridge in the wagon 3 weeks ago, but riding through it now, feeling the rhythm of the horse beneath her. Breathing air that smelled of sage and cooling earth, she understood why a man would fight for this, why a man would sacrifice everything for it. If it came to that. Caleb pointed out landmarks as they rode. The swimming hole where he'd learned to swim, the rocky outcrop where he'd shot his first deer at 14, the meadow where his father had proposed to his mother 40 years ago, before the house was built. "She said no the first time," Caleb said. "Told him she wouldn't marry a man who didn't have a roof to put over her head. So he built one. Took him 6 months, working alone. Then he asked again. What did she say? She said the roof leaked. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But she married him anyway." They climbed higher. The valley fell away below them, the house and barn shrinking to toy-sized shapes, the creek a silver ribbon winding through gold grass. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, its shadow passing over them. The family plot sat at the top of the ridge. 3 wooden crosses, weathered gray by years of sun and wind. The names carved into the wood had faded, barely legible now. Caleb dismounted and stood before them, hat in his hands. Evelyn climbed down from Penny, stood beside him. "Father? Mother? William?" Caleb's voice was quiet. "William was my brother. Scarlet fever took him when he was 7. I was 9. A 4th space sat empty beside the crosses. The grass there was undisturbed, but the message was clear. "That's yours," Evelyn said. "Someday, when I'm done." He turned to look at her. "Ruth never came up here. Said it was morbid, thinking about where you'd be buried. But I always found it peaceful, knowing where I'd end up, knowing I'd be with them." Evelyn's hand rose to the brooch at her collar. Her fingers found the familiar shape, the smooth jetstone, the gold setting, the tiny clasp at the back. She'd pinned it to her dress every morning for 3 years. Hadn't taken it off even to sleep. She unpinned it now, held it in her palm. Thomas's face had faded in her memory. The exact sound of his voice, the particular way he laughed, those were gone now, replaced by impressions, by the feeling of him rather than the fact. But she remembered his hands, big hands, scarred from work, gentle when they touched her hair. Thomas would have liked this place, she said. He always talked about buying land. When the business was stable, he'd say, when we had enough saved, one more run, Evie, one more, and then we'll find our place. She closed her fingers around the brooch, the edges pressed into her palm. One more run, she repeated. He said it so many times. And then one morning in Abilene, his lungs gave out, and there were no more runs left. Caleb said nothing, just stood beside her, solid and present, while the wind moved through the grass and the hawk circled overhead. Ruth said, I loved the land more than her, he said finally. Maybe she was right. It was easier. Easier. Land doesn't leave, doesn't change its mind, doesn't look at you one day like you're a stranger. He stared at the crosses. 12 years we were married, and one morning she said she couldn't do it anymore. Packed a bag, got on the stage to Denver. Haven't heard from her since. Evelyn looked at him. This man she'd known for 18 days, who'd trusted her with his papers and his home and now his secrets. No, she said quietly. Land just sits there while you pour your whole life into it. And then someone with a pen takes it away. They rode back slowly, letting the horses pick their way down the slope. The sun had passed its peak, shadows lengthening across the valley. By the time they reached the house, the air had turned cool, carrying the first hints of the evening chill to come. Josiah had returned from church. He stood on the porch, watching them approach, something in his face that Evelyn couldn't read. Letter came while you were gone, he said, from the Hendricks place. Evelyn's heart jumped. She dismounted quickly, handed Penny's reins to Caleb, and took the envelope from Josiah's hand. The paper was cheap, the handwriting cramped and uncertain. She read it standing on the porch, while the men waited. They're not coming, she said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Flat, distant. They've accepted the bank's buyout. They say they can't afford to fight. That evening, they sat on the porch, 2 rocking chairs, 2 cups of coffee. A silence that had grown familiar over 3 weeks. The sun had set, leaving the sky streaked with orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. I'm 52 years old, Caleb said. The words came slowly, like he was pulling them from somewhere deep. I've got a ranch the bank wants to steal, a hired man who reckons I'm a fool, and a woman I've known 3 weeks who's the only person who's listened to me in years. He turned to look at her. I don't know what that adds up to. Evelyn rocked slowly. The chair creaked beneath her weight. It adds up to not alone, she said. That's more than I had last month. The coyote called again. Closer now. She didn't reach for his hand, but she didn't move her chair away either. They sat like that until the stars came out, 2 people who'd forgotten how to be known, remembering. The next morning, a second letter arrived. The marshals had given up too. Only Patterson hadn't responded. And Evelyn was running out of allies. The buggy came up the road at 10:30. Evelyn saw it from the kitchen window, black lacquered wood, brass fittings catching the morning sun, drawn by a matched pair of sorrels that had never pulled a plow in their lives. A rider flanked the buggy on horseback. Tin star on his chest. Caleb. He came to the window. His jaw tightened. "Whitmore," he said, "and Deputy Crawford." They stood on the porch as the buggy pulled into the yard. Josiah emerged from the barn, pitchfork in hand, and positioned himself near the water trough. His eyes never left the deputy. Horace Whitmore climbed down from the buggy with the careful movements of a man who didn't want to dirty his shoes. His suit was gray wool, pressed and clean. His boots were polished. He carried a leather satchel under one arm. "Mr. Rivers," he smiled, "and Mrs. Brooks, what a pleasure to see you both." Crawford stayed mounted. His hand rested on his thigh, inches from the pistol on his belt. "State your business," Caleb said. "Just a courtesy call." Whitmore climbed the porch steps, close enough now that Evelyn could smell his cologne, something floral. Expensive? Out of place in this yard of dust and horse manure. "I heard you've been asking questions around town, visiting the recorder's office, writing letters to your neighbors." He shook his head slowly. "I wanted to make sure you understood the situation clearly." "I understand it fine." "Do you—" Whitmore reached into his satchel and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "Because I have here affidavits from the Hendricks family and the Marshalls, both confirming that they signed their amendments voluntarily, both stating that no fraud or coercion was involved." He held the papers out. "Your coalition, Mr. Rivers, has collapsed." Caleb didn't take the papers. His hands stayed at his sides, fingers curled into fists. Whitmore turned to Evelyn. His eyes moved over her slowly, her plain dress, her work-roughened hands, the gray streaking her hair. The assessment was deliberate, insulting. "Mrs. Brooks, I admire your persistence, truly. A widow of your age, coming all this way, inserting yourself into affairs you don't understand." He tucked the papers back into his satchel. "But persistence doesn't change the law. You've lost. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone." "The law," Evelyn said, "doesn't protect forgery." The smile flickered, just for an instant. Then it was back, smooth and cold. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you have evidence to support it." "I have enough." "Do you—" Whitmore stepped closer, close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his nose, the yellowed teeth behind his smile. "Because from where I stand, you have nothing. A theory, a suspicion, the desperate hope of a woman who's already lost once and can't accept that she's about to lose again." The words landed like blows. Evelyn felt them in her chest, in her stomach, in the heat that rose to her face. "And let's be honest about the situation here," Whitmore continued, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "A widow? Living unchaperoned with a bachelor rancher for over a month? What do you think people in town are saying? Mrs. Brooks, what do you think they whisper when you walk past?" He spread his hands. "I'm not the one who'll destroy your reputation. You've already done that yourself." Evelyn's mouth opened. No words came out. "Take the offer, Mr. Rivers." Whitmore turned back to Caleb. 40 cents on the dollar, $500 cash. Walk away with something while you still can." "Get off my land," Caleb said. His voice was barely controlled. 35 days. Whitmore descended the porch steps, brushing dust from his sleeve. "Think carefully." The buggy turned in the yard. The matched sorrels trotted toward the road, heads high, hooves kicking up dust. Crawford followed, the tin star on his chest catching the light one last time before they disappeared around the bend. The silence stretched. Evelyn stood on the porch, staring at nothing. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her face burned with shame, not because Whitmore had been cruel, but because part of her believed him. You've already lost once. She'd lost Thomas, lost the company, lost her daughter to distance and silence, lost 3 years of her life standing on train platforms, waiting for someone to choose her. And now everyone in Copper Creek thought she was a fallen woman. The afternoon passed in fragments. Evelyn retreated to her room, closed the door, sat on the edge of the narrow bed. She didn't cry. Crying was for women who still believed tears could change things. She sat, and she stared at the wall, and she felt the weight of every failure she'd ever carried settle onto her shoulders like stones. At supper, she couldn't eat. Josiah's beans tasted like ash. The cornbread stuck in her throat. She excused herself early and went outside. Into the darkness, needing air that didn't smell like the inside of a house. The yard was muddy from yesterday's rain. She stepped wrong, her boots sinking into a rut. And suddenly she was falling hands out, knees hitting the ground, palms slapping into cold black muck. She stayed there, on her hands and knees in the mud, her dress soaked, her hair coming loose from its pins. The smell of wet earth filling her nostrils. She could feel it seeping through the wool, cold against her skin, clinging to her fingers. "This is where you belong," something whispered. "In the dirt, on your knees," just like he said. Footsteps behind her. A lantern's light swinging across the yard. "Mrs. Brooks," Caleb's voice, sharp with concern. She should get up, she should stand, brush off the mud, pretend it didn't happen. That's what dignity required. That's what a proper woman would do. She didn't move. "Evelyn?" He crouched beside her, set the lantern in the mud. His hands found her elbows, steadied her. "Come inside. Let me help you up." Maybe he's right. The words came out raw, scraped from somewhere deep. Maybe I should just go back to Denver. Find a boarding house. Stop pretending I can change anything. You don't believe that. Don't I? She looked up at him, mud streaking her face, her hair hanging loose around her shoulders. I lost my husband. Lost my business. Lost my daughter. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. And now I'm going to lose this too. Because that's what I do. Caleb. I lose. He was quiet for a long moment. The lantern flickered. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. I lost the freight company, she said. The words spilled out now, unstoppable. After Thomas died, I fought for 6 months, hired a lawyer with money I didn't have, presented my case, and I lost. The partners took everything. They left me with nothing but a carpet bag and a mourning brooch and the clothes on my back. Then why did you tell me to fight? She looked at him. His face was half-shadowed in the lantern light. Mud stained his knees where he knelt beside her. Because I could live with losing, she said slowly. I couldn't have lived with not trying. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb reached down. His fingers wrapped around her wrist warm, solid, real. Then get up, he said. Get up, and we try. He pulled her to her feet. Mud dripped from her dress. Her hands were black with it. She looked at him. This man she'd known for 38 days, who'd chosen her when no one else would, who was still here, still standing beside her in the mud. All right, she said. We try. They walked back to the house together. The lantern swung between them, casting shadows across the yard. Evelyn's boots squelched with every step. Her dress clung to her legs, heavy with mud. At the porch steps, Josiah waited with a bucket of water and a rag. That Whitmore smiles like a rattlesnake suns itself, he said, handing her the rag. Right before it strikes. Evelyn wiped the mud from her hands, looked out at the darkness beyond the lantern's reach. Then we'd better strike first. In the morning, she would go back to town, back to the recorder's office, back to Edwin Marsh and his shaking hands, because Edwin knew something, and Evelyn was going to find out what. The basket sat on Evelyn's lap as the wagon rolled toward town. Josiah had baked the bread that morning fresh, still warm when she'd wrapped it in cloth. A jar of his pickles clinked against a small pot of blackberry jam she'd found in the pantry. Simple offerings, the kind a neighbor might bring. She had washed and pressed her navy dress the night before. The mud was gone, but she could still feel the ghost of it on her knees. Caleb held the reins loosely, letting the horses find their own pace. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No." Evelyn adjusted the cloth over the bread. "But it's the only card we have left." The recorder's office was empty when she pushed through the door. Edwin Marsh sat behind the counter, head bent over a ledger, pen scratching across the page. He looked up at the sound of the bell, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, then fear, then a careful blankness. "Mrs. Brooks? Mr. Marsh?" She set the basket on the counter between them. "I brought you something. Fresh bread, pickles, some jam. I thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal." He stared at the basket like it might contain a snake. "I can't accept that. It's just bread, Mr. Marsh, not a bribe." His hands gripped the edge of the counter. The knuckles went white. Evelyn didn't move, didn't push, just stood there, letting the silence stretch. "How's your mother?" she asked finally. "I heard she's been unwell." Something cracked in Edwin's face, a tremor around the mouth, a wetness at the corner of his eyes that he blinked away quickly. "Consumption," he said. His voice came out hoarse. "Doctor says she needs a drier climate. Arizona, maybe. New Mexico. Somewhere the air doesn't sit so heavy in her lungs." "That's expensive. Moving a sick woman across the territory." "Yes, ma'am." "It is." Evelyn reached into the basket, pulled out the bread, set it on the counter. The smell of it filled the small office, yeast and warmth, and something like comfort. "Mr. Marsh, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to make demands or accusations." She met his eyes, held them. "I'm here because I think you're a decent man who got caught up in something ugly, and I think it's eating you alive." Edwin's chin trembled. He looked away, staring at the wall of ledgers behind him, the rows of records stretching back decades. $50, he said quietly. That's what he offered me. $50 to update some files, change some dates, make sure certain documents matched certain signatures. His voice cracked. My mother was coughing blood. The doctor wanted $20 just to look at her. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Mr. Marsh. Do they? He turned back to her, and now the tears were flowing freely, cutting tracks down his pale cheeks. When your mother is dying, and a man offers you enough money to buy her another month, another year, what choice is that? Evelyn said nothing. She understood choices like that, understood the weight of them, the way they pressed down on your chest until you couldn't breathe. Last week, Edwin continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, Whitmore came to see me, said there might be questions. Said if anyone asked, I should say I never saw anything unusual. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Then he said if the investigation goes bad, he'll need someone to blame, someone expendable. He's going to sacrifice you. I know. Edwin reached beneath the counter and pulled out a manila folder, worn at the edges, stuffed thick with papers. His hands shook as he held it. I made copies. The night he told me to burn the originals. I stayed late, after everyone was gone, and I copied everything. The real documents. The ones before I changed them. He slid the folder across the counter. Evelyn's fingers touched the edge of it. Inside, she could see the paper's dates, signatures, terms that would prove everything she'd suspected. I couldn't sleep, Mrs. Brooks. I'm 23 years old. I didn't sign up to be a thief. Why now? She asked. Why give these to me? Edwin's eyes met hers. In them, she saw something she recognized. The exhaustion of carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. Because you brought bread, he said simply. Because you asked about my mother. Because in 6 weeks, you're the first person who's treated me like a human being instead of a tool. Evelyn took the folder, held it against her chest. Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Don't thank me yet. He wiped his nose with his sleeve. Whitmore has lawyers, money, friends in the territory government. You'll need more than paper to beat him. I know. She tucked the folder into her carpet bag. But paper is a start. 7 days later, Evelyn sat in the Copper Creek courthouse. The room was smaller than she'd expected, wooden benches packed with onlookers, a pot-bellied stove throwing off waves of heat, the smell of tobacco smoke and nervous sweat, heavy in the air. She sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, the folder of evidence resting beside her. Caleb sat at the defendant's table with Samuel Garrett, a lawyer from Prescott who'd agreed to take the case after reviewing Edwin's documents. Garrett was 60, gray-bearded, with a voice like gravel and a reputation for fighting lost causes. He'd taken the case for free. I've seen what men like Whitmore do, he'd said when they'd met 3 days ago. Someone needs to stop them. Judge Marcus Holloway entered through the side door. The room fell silent. He was a heavy man with sharp eyes that missed nothing, 19 years on the circuit. Evelyn had learned, known for fairness, known for a temper that could strip paint when provoked. In the matter of First Regional Bank versus Caleb Rivers, he began, settling into his chair. I've reviewed the petition and the evidence submitted. Mr. Garrett, you may proceed. Garrett rose, laid out the case piece by piece, the original loan agreement, the altered amendment, the forged signature, the pattern across multiple ranches Hendricks, Marshall, Patterson, all with identical clauses added in the same 6-week window. Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table, his lawyer a thin man from Prescott named Crane whispering urgently in his ear. His face had gone pale. We also have testimony, Garrett continued, from the county clerk, Edwin Marsh, who will confirm that he was paid $50 by Mr. Whitmore to alter official records. The courtroom erupted, voices shouting, benches scraping, Whitmore rising to his feet. This is outrageous. Crane was on his feet. This woman, he pointed at Evelyn, has no legal standing. She's not a lawyer. She's not a wife. She's nothing but a vagrant widow who's inserted herself into Bon. Sit down, Mr. Crane. Judge Holloway's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Mrs. Brooks is a witness, not a litigant, and her evidence is compelling. He banged his gavel. Continue. Mr. Garrett. Edwin took the stand. His voice trembled. But he didn't falter. He described the payments, the instructions, the night he'd made copies because he couldn't live with what he'd done. Josiah testified next. Spoke of Caleb's character, 30 years of knowing the man. Never once seeing him cheat or lie. Old Pete from the station testified to Whitmore's reputation. Sharp dealing. Contracts that seemed fair until you read the fine print. Men who signed in good faith and lost everything. A written statement from Hendricks was read aloud how Whitmore had threatened his family. How he'd taken the buyout not because it was fair but because he was afraid. Through it all, Evelyn watched Whitmore's face, watched the confidence drain away, replaced by something she recognized. The look of a man who'd finally been caught. Mr. Whitmore? Judge Holloway's voice was ice. I've been riding this circuit for 19 years. I know the difference between a sharp deal and outright fraud. This is starting to look like fraud. Your Honor, I can explain. You'll have your chance. But right now, I've heard enough. He gathered his papers, tapped them against the bench. I'm taking this under advisement. I'll have a ruling in 3 days. The gavel came down. The room erupted again. Voices shouting, people rising from their seats, hands reaching to clap Caleb on the shoulder. Evelyn sat frozen, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. 3 days. Garrett leaned over to her. You did good work. Mrs. Brooks, that folder, those copies, that's what made the difference. Edwin made the difference, she said. I just asked about his mother. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Evelyn drew a deep breath, filling her lungs with something that wasn't fear. Caleb found her on the courthouse steps. You did it, he said quietly. You actually did it. We don't know that yet. The judge hasn't ruled. He will? Caleb's hand found hers, squeezed. He saw what we saw. He knows. 3 days. 72 hours of waiting. 72 hours of not knowing whether everything they'd fought for would be enough. Evelyn looked up at the courthouse, at the lamp burning in Judge Holloway's window. What if it's not enough? She asked. What if he rules against us? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The cold air fogged between them. Then we lose standing up, he said. Just like you told me. They walked to the wagon together, their breath visible in the November night. The horses stamped and snorted, eager to move. 3 days. Evelyn climbed onto the seat, pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders, and waited for Caleb to take the reins. Somewhere in that courthouse. A judge was deciding their future, and all they could do was wait. The courtroom was silent. Evelyn sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, watching Judge Holloway shuffle through his papers. 3 days of waiting, 3 days of barely sleeping, barely eating, counting the hours until this moment. Caleb sat at the defendant's table, shoulders rigid, jaw tight. Samuel Garrett sat beside him, calm as stone. Whitmore was at the plaintiff's table. His lawyer, Crane, had left town yesterday, urgent business elsewhere. Supposedly, Whitmore sat alone now, smaller than he'd seemed before. The polish stripped away. Judge Holloway cleared his throat. In the matter of First Regional Bank versus Caleb Rivers, he began, his voice filling the packed room. I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. I have examined the original loan agreement, the disputed amendments, and the testimony of multiple witnesses, including the sworn statement of County Clerk Edwin Marsh. He looked up. His eyes found Whitmore. The evidence is clear. Amendment 2, dated February 1887, contains material alterations to the original loan terms, alterations that were made without the knowledge or consent of the borrower. The signature on this document does not match Mr. Rivers's known handwriting. Furthermore, Mr. Marsh has testified under oath that he was paid to falsify official records at Mr. Whitmore's direction. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. Accordingly, Judge Holloway continued, I am ruling that Amendment 2 is void. The original loan terms, as specified in the agreement of March 1885, are hereby reinstated. Mr. Rivers owes First Regional Bank $400, payable over 18 months. $400, not $1,200. The ranch was safe. Evelyn's vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. Furthermore, the judge said, I am forwarding all evidence of fraud to the territorial prosecutor for investigation. Mr. Whitmore, you are ordered to remain within this jurisdiction until that investigation is complete. You are released on $500 bail pending trial for forgery and fraud. He gathered his papers. Mr. Marsh, in light of your cooperation and testimony, you are granted immunity from prosecution. I suggest you use this second chance wisely. The gavel came down. The room erupted, voices shouting, people rising from their seats. Evelyn stayed where she was, frozen, unable to process what had just happened. They'd won. Caleb turned, found her in the crowd. His eyes were wet. She rose, walked toward him. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Mrs. Brooks? His voice was rough. Evelyn, we did it. You did it, she said. All I did was read some papers. You did a sight more than that, and you know it. Garrett shook her hand. Fine work, Mrs. Brooks. That folder from Edwin, that's what turned the tide. Without those copies, we had nothing. People pressed around them, hands reaching to shake Caleb's hand, voices congratulating him. Old Pete from the station, the Hendricks family, who'd come after all. Even some of the townspeople who'd whispered about Evelyn behind her back. She stepped away from the crowd. Needed air, needed space, outside. The November wind cut through her shawl. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that promised the first real cold of the season. She stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deep, feeling the chill fill her lungs. Whitmore emerged from the building, flanked by Deputy Crawford. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched. He didn't look at Evelyn as he passed. Mrs. Brooks. She turned. Edwin Marsh stood in the courthouse doorway, hat in his hands. Mr. Marsh, I wanted to thank you, he said, for not giving up, for coming back when everyone else walked away. You're the one who gave us the evidence. You're the one who testified? I almost didn't. He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands the same way Caleb did. I almost burned those copies a dozen times. Told myself it wasn't my fight. Told myself I had enough problems of my own. What changed your mind? He was quiet for a long moment. You asked about my mother, he said finally. Nobody else ever did. They just saw the clerk behind the counter. You saw a person. He put on his hat, touched the brim in farewell. Good luck, Mrs. Brooks. I hope you find what you're looking for. He walked away down the street, shoulders straight, head up. A young man who'd made a terrible choice and found a way to make it right. Evelyn watched him go. The next morning, word spread through Copper Creek like wildfire. The Hendricks family came to the ranch before breakfast. They wanted to know if Evelyn would look at their settlement papers. Maybe it wasn't too late to challenge them. The Pattersons arrived an hour later with the same question. By noon, 3 other families had sent letters. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by documents, her notebook filling with names and dates and questions. "You're going to need a bigger table," Josiah said while setting a cup of coffee beside her elbow. "I'm going to need a bigger notebook." Caleb watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a strange expression on his face. "What?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing." But he was smiling. "Just thinking." The afternoon passed in a blur of papers and conversations. By supper, Evelyn had agreed to review 6 more cases. Word had reached as far as Prescott. A lawyer there wanted to know if she'd consult on a similar matter in Yavapai County. When the last visitor left, the sun was setting behind the western ridge. The sky blazed orange and gold, colors reflecting off the creek, painting the valley in shades of fire. Evelyn sat on the porch, the quilt from her room wrapped around her shoulders. Her first frost had come in the night. The grass glittered with it, catching the fading light like scattered diamonds. Caleb brought coffee, sat in the rocking chair beside her. The chair he'd built while she was working on the documents. She'd noticed him carving it in the evenings, sanding the seat until it was smooth. He'd never said it was for her. He'd just put it there, beside his own. "I wrote to Ruth last year," he said. The words came without preamble. "Asked for a divorce. Never heard back." Evelyn wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. The tin was warm against her palms. "So we wait," she said. "We wait." He turned to look at her. "But I wanted you to know when I'm free, if I'm ever free, I'd like to court you proper. Church socials, Sunday dinners, the whole business." He paused. "If you'd have me." The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt them settle into her chest, warm and unexpected. "I've spent 3 years waiting for something I couldn't name," she said slowly. "Standing on train platforms, sleeping in boarding houses, telling myself I was looking for work when I was really looking for somewhere to belong. Did you find it?" She looked at the land. The cottonwoods, bare now, their branches reaching toward the gray sky. The house that was starting to feel like hers. The barn where Josiah was making himself conspicuously busy. The family plot on the ridge, where 3 wooden crosses stood guard over generations of rivers who'd lived and died on this soil. 47 days ago, she'd stood alone on a train platform, watching younger women walk away on someone's arm. She'd been ready to give up, ready to catch the 2:15 back to Denver and disappear into a boarding house somewhere, waiting for nothing. Then a man on a tired horse had asked for help, and she'd said yes. "I think maybe I did," she said. Footsteps on the porch behind them. Josiah passed by, tools in hand, heading toward the house. "Patch that leak in the spare room," he said without stopping. "Case anybody's thinking of staying permanent." The door closed behind him. Evelyn turned to Caleb. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first real smile she'd felt in weeks. "He's not subtle. Never has been." Caleb's own smile surfaced, slow and warm. "It's one of his best qualities." The sun touched the horizon. The sky blazed one last time, then faded to purple and gray. The first stars appeared, faint against the darkening blue. "I like it here, Caleb," Evelyn said. "I like the land. I like the work. She met his eyes. And I like you. His hand found hers on the armrest of the rocking chair. His fingers were warm, calloused, steady. That's enough for me, he said. That's more than enough. The rocking chairs creaked in rhythm. The coffee grew cold in their cups. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. Two people who'd stopped expecting anything from life, sitting side by side, not happily ever after, something better, a beginning. There's a quiet weight that comes after a story like this one. Not heavy. Exactly. More like the feeling of sitting still after a long journey, when your body hasn't quite caught up with the fact that you've arrived. Many of us know what it feels like to stand somewhere, waiting to be chosen, to carry something useful inside us that no one thinks to ask for, to wonder if the years have made us invisible, or if perhaps we were never seen clearly to begin with. Some of us have known a Caleb, someone who looked past what others dismissed and found something worth keeping. Some of us are still waiting, and some of us have learned to stop waiting and start building, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. It's all right if this story stirred something that doesn't have a name. Not everything needs to be understood. Not every feeling needs to be resolved. Sometimes a story just sits with us for a while, like an old friend who doesn't need to talk to keep us company. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.